This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.
Latest data from the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, shows that currency in circulation rose to 5.007 trillion naira as of June 2025. This increase is compared to June 2024, and some experts say it indicates increased economic activity. Joining the conversation is Samuel Oyekomi, financial analyst and researcher at Northern Berger. Mr. Oyekomi, good morning. Thank you for joining us on the conversation.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Can we start by getting essentially your view of the data from the CBN regarding the rise in currency of the currency in circulation?
Yeah, I think, well, you look at it year on year, and you'd say that currency in circulation has increased. So in June, it was about 5 trillion naira. So June last year was around 4 trillion naira. That's almost 1 trillion naira increase on a year-on-year basis. But what we've seen in the last 6 months so far this year is that it's really been neither here or there, but largely tended towards general decline. Don't forget, we're coming from an era in terms of where the last CBN governor pretty much reduced currency in circulation to less than 1 trillion naira at some point. And then as a fallout of that, the new regime of the CBN saw a significant increase in terms of money supply and currency in circulation. So I'd say, yeah, I think the fact that it is declining, in my own opinion, seems like a positive compared to sometime last year where we had a lot of increase in terms of money supply and then currency in circulation.
Well, I think perhaps part of the problem is that decline does not seem to be sustained just yet. It's been described as fluctuations, and if you consider that these fluctuations started after the half-year count, there are questions on the extent to which CBN policies are working to curb it. When the current CBN governor took office, he did talk about curbing excess currency in circulation. Data tells us that more than 90% of this amount is actually held outside of the financial institutions. So it's outside banks. It's essentially in our pockets and in our safes and whatnot. What's the danger with this phenomenon?
Yeah, interesting, right? In the last few years, it has pretty much been relatively over 90% of that's the currency outside bank votes. And for the first time in June, it actually came down below 90%, which I think is a good one. But then it speaks to the level of the system in terms of how informal our economy is, how Nigerians prefer to deal in cash rather than the banking sector. And what that does is that it brings quite a number of potential negative issues. One of them is, again, the level of, it could even lead to robbery, right? The fact that you're holding on to cash for so long, it could lead to pocketing and all that and other stuff. And then another fact is that it could also drive inflation. Unfortunately, the inflation that CBN is trying to curb, which many of us believe that it is mostly structural rather than the fact that we have so much money in supply. But again, that is also a factor that is worth noting. So the fact that you still have a number of these currencies still in the hands of people, the chances are they will keep chasing fewer goods. And of course, production has not really ramped up to levels that you would expect to drive economic growth. So what that also triggers is that as much as the CBN is fighting monetary policy to fight inflation, and that you have a lot of currency in circulation also pretty much returns us back to inflation. And then you could also see that from inflation numbers. 1 month we see decline, but on a month-on-month basis, you tend to see that there are immediate shocks and risk in terms of inflationary pressure.
So to talk about causes for the amounts of currency in circulation, we have in the past heard about printing of money. Is this the only reason why currency in circulation would rise to these sorts of levels?
So if you were going to go back to printing of money, I think this was during COVID-19. There was a lot of intervention that period by the CBN in a bid to ensure that the economy remained afloat. Right now, of course, we don't have data to prove that, but I don't think there's so much printing happening. But a number of things have happened in the last few years. 2 years ago, there was the liberalization of exchange rates. We saw devaluation of our currency. And what happened is that every component that has to do with FX in terms of our books soared significantly. Our net foreign assets rose astronomically. It's now finding itself in the region of 40 trillion naira. And just that alone really drove significant increase in terms of our money supply entry. We also see similar trend also in terms of net domestic assets, either as a result of increase in private sector credit or increase in terms of currency circulation, just as you mentioned. So there are quite a number of things. I don't think it's about printing. Printing would be in the ages of 2023. Right now, we have many other structural things that are really impacting huge inflows of currencies in the system. And that, again, you could also go back to the fact that Nigerians, again, still lacking informal, don't trust the banking system. In a number of places, when you go to the various part of the Nigerian, you see a number of regions that are still quite underserved in terms of financial services. Even in better environments, even in Lagos, you still find a number of people preferring to deal in cash. And of course, in quotation, there are still a number of people who still feel cash is one way that corrupt practices are enabled in the country.
So, Mr. Oyekomi, I'm thinking of the cash reserve ratio. The last last MPC meeting had held it at 50%. And it's interesting because it's supposed to be one of the ways that you curb the excess liquidity in the market. But it does speak to two things, I have two questions, really twofold. If you consider that most of the money is held outside of the banks, it's not just about people's engagement with the financial institutions. It's that generally trade is really being conducted outside of the financial system. And if this is the case, and CRR is one of the ways the CBN tries to curb this, are we using the wrong tools? Does that mean that the traditional system simply will not work in curbing this liquidity?
Interesting question, right? So if you look at it, right, if the CRR is held at 50%, which means that the banks are obligated to keep about 50% of their deposit with the CBN, which leaves them about 50%, and then there's also the amount of loans that they can also give out. So they have quite those constraints. But don't forget that when the currency is not with the bank, is outside, might not necessarily mean it's trading. It could just be sitting under the pillow of someone, right? It could be at the backyard of someone. It doesn't really matter what that value that money is doing. It might not necessarily be yielding any productive venture, right? But that again, that is also speculative because there is really no data to prove that. I think that the CBN monetary tightening policy have had its own influence, right, in tightening monetary policy. When you look at it from a system, financial systems liquidity point of view, we see that happen year in, year out. You see when there's a HOMO issuance, you see that there's always that squeeze in terms of financial liquidity, and that has also impacted interest rate in the fixed income side of things, and then in terms of banking, over-the-counter overnight rates, and their open buyback rates. But bringing it back to mainstream, right, talking about how if that policy is effective, I think it's effective in terms of the financial system. But the broad base is the fact that Nigeria's economy is still largely informal. So when you tighten liquidity, the fact that those money have not found themselves in the bank in the first place, those policies will not affect them. I think recently the MBS released data around the classification of different industries by formal and informal, and you see a number of industries, especially things around trade. A huge part of those are quite informal, and that's where the money moves. That's where the money keeps moving. And if that is informal, the chances are, and those monies don't find themselves in the bank, these policies will not work. The only way it will work is if those funds are able to aggregate a lot more Nigerians into the financial system, the financial banking system. That way, the monetary policy can be able to help curb large money supplies in the system and whatnot. But right now, a number of those in the hands of people, about 90% is just in the hands of people outside the banking system. So no matter how much you keep tightening, chances are the effects would quite be minimal.
Mr. Oyekomi, thank you for your time and expertise on this conversation. Samuel Oyekomi is a researcher and a financial analyst at Norimberger who joined us today to speak on the CBN stating that the currency in circulation has increased year on year from the figures recorded in June of 2024. As of June 2025, the currency in circulation rose to 5.007 trillion naira. You're still listening to Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos, your Beyond the News station. We urge you to stay tuned to Now Breakfast.
This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.